Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Lancet Countdown on Health and Plastics. Thank you for being here so bright, so early in the day. My name is Tiza Mafira. I am one of the co-authors of the Lancet report that was just published this morning, and I will be moderating the first panel session. First of all, I'd like to welcome opening remarks delivered by Maria Neira, MD, who is the former Director, Department of Environment and Climate Change and Health of the World Health Organization. Please, Maria.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here to motivate you to do more on this negotiation, but somebody who wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning to come here to a meeting at 7 doesn't need to be motivated. Probably you are extremely concerned and extremely committed to do this. 3 minutes, 3 messages. First, congratulations on the Lancet report. It's not any longer under embargo, so let's start to announce it and disseminate it. Use your social media. Please go ahead with that. First message, context. Don't forget that what we are doing here is part of the environmental health agenda. It's trying to protect the millions of deaths we have every year due to the fact that our citizens, our people, is exposed to environmental risk factors. You might remember the report of WHO where we say that 25% of the global burden of disease, of the global mortality, is related to exposure to environmental risk factors. So first reason, the context. We are having these negotiations are part of the bigger agenda on protecting our population from environmental risk factors. Second, the health argument. People will tell you there is a need for an exception for the health sector. The health sector needs plastic. We are not asking as the health sector for any exception. Any blanket exception. We understand that we will need time, but we are not asking for anything like that. On the contrary, the health sector, the health community is ready to contribute by reducing our own contribution to the plastic. And I'm inviting all of you, for those who are not yet familiar, to join ATTACH, which is the Alliance on Transformative Action on Climate Change and Health, where we are looking at how their own health system can reduce our own carbon footprint, and by doing so, definitely we will reduce the use of plastic and demonstrate that it can be done. And exactly that, it can be done. I think we have very good examples of and opportunities here to join forces with the Tobacco Framework Convention. We have been fighting against tobacco for a long time with, I think, successful, although we still have 8 million deaths every year caused by exposure to tobacco consumption. However, if we ban the plastic that is on tobacco filters, if we join forces with them, I think we have again a good opportunity to move on public health. And the third of my message will be, please be ambitious. Some people think that a negotiation is about reaching by consensus and agreement. And it's true, reaching by consensus and agreement is very good. But if the consensus requires going for the minimum, the lowest denominator, that's not a good consensus. So be very ambitious because it's about the health of the people here. Some people will tell you, do you have enough scientific evidence proving that the plastics are affecting human health? I think we need to respond to that, people. Do you have enough evidence demonstrating that having microplastics in our placenta is a good thing for human health? Start by the end. Are you happy with having microplastics everywhere in our body? Do you think this is good for our health? So if not, the health argument has to be the one that will motivate this ambition. Be very much ambitious. There is never enough ambition when it's about protecting public health. So thank you very much. Go for it. And again, come back with a very good plastic treaty, please.
Thank you, Maria, for setting the tone. There is never enough ambition when it comes to protecting health. Next, we will have some introductory remarks by Richard Horton, who is the editor-in-chief of The Lancet, who will be delivering his remarks through video.
Hello, it's a great pleasure and an honour for me to be with you today, albeit virtually, at the launch of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Plastics. Let me begin by trying to explain a little bit about what a Lancet Countdown aims to be. The idea first emerged from a 2003 series that we published on child survival. And together with a remarkable team of public health scientists, we wanted to use the compelling evidence underpinning child health to try to kickstart a new era of action to save children's lives. The project evolved from a series to a Lancet Countdown on maternal, newborn and child survival. And the goal was to create a regular report to hold governments in particular accountable for their promises and commitments to women's and children's health. The countdown was intended to be a science-based, independent accountability mechanism. And these publications, along with many other initiatives, helped to improve political commitment to women's and children's health and even to deliver greater financial investments for women and children. 2 further countdowns have followed, one on non-communicable diseases, and the latest iteration of that will be published at the high-level meeting on NCDs at the UN General Assembly later this year. But our most developed countdown is, of course, in climate and health, and we'll publish our 9th annual countdown on climate and health, led by the inestimable Marina Romanello, later this year, just before the COP30 meeting in Brazil. The objective for that countdown remains exactly the same: to use the most reliable data that we can find to inform indicators that allow us to track impacts of climate on health, and to measure progress on adaptation, on mitigation, on finance, on economics, and on public and political engagement. Now, let me say from the start that no progress in global health is ever made by one initiative alone. The Lancet Countdown on Climate and Health, for example, has been part of a much larger movement that has sought to refocus advocacy about the climate emergency more towards the human impacts of climate change. And with new and generous funding from the Wellcome Trust, together with an expanded global footprint of regional countdowns and greater emphasis on policy impact, we really are looking forward to what we hope will be some of the most productive years of this collaboration. So now we come to the Lancet Countdown on plastics and health. We are 100% committed to working with you to make this countdown a similar success, to stimulate new science about the relation between plastics and human health, to hold those with power accountable, again, for their policies to diminish the adverse effects of plastics on health, and to improve public awareness about the threat of plastics to human health. The great Phil Landrigan, and I know you're in the room, Phil, led our 2017 Commission on Pollution and Health. And Phil, I well remember sitting in your office planning that project together, and what a successful project it was. And it was a special pleasure, therefore, when I received your email in April 2024 to propose that we work together to produce an independent, indicator-led global monitoring system. Those were your words, Phil, to track plastics and petrochemicals and their hazards to human and indeed planetary health. I am absolutely thrilled that we're now beginning to realize your ambition. Remember, our success will depend upon forging a truly global partnership among scientists, civil society, multilateral agencies, universities, professional associations, scientific academies, foundations, development organizations, and even the private sector. So today, we begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Let's get started. As we've just heard, the Lancet Countdown on Health and Plastics is a multi-year project that will track the impacts of plastic pollution on human health across all stages of the plastic life cycle and monitor progress on addressing these impacts from a health perspective. It will identify and regularly report on scientific indicators across all stages of the plastic life cycle and track progress towards minimizing exposures and human health impact. And the goal is to provide independent data so that what is measured can be managed for the benefit of public health, for the benefit of policymakers, and as Maria was saying, for the benefit of pushing ambition. So today marks the first milestone. A new paper published today offers the most comprehensive, up-to-date assessment of health impacts across the full life cycle. This has been the work of 21 co-authors, comprising of health professionals, scientists, chemists, and policy experts from around the world. We fully expect this group of experts will grow in number over time. So now we'll hear from some of the experts who co-authored the paper and will be involved in the countdown, and from representatives familiar with the health impacts for some communities that are disproportionately affected. So in our first panel today, I have the honor of introducing 3 of the experts and co-authors of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Plastics. Please welcome Martin Wagner, Jane Munk, and Christos Simeonides. We also have 2 amazing individuals who work alongside communities. Joe Banner, who is the co-founder and co-director of the Descendants Project, who works alongside fence line communities. And we have John Chweya, president of the Kenya National Waste Pickers Welfare Association, who works alongside waste pickers. Please give a round of applause to Joe and John. So Martin, let's start with you. Can you tell us, what does the Lancet mean by health impacts across all stages of the plastic life cycle? What does that cover, really?
Thanks, Tisa. And that's a big question to start early in the morning, I understand that. But I want to try by start to say that there's ample scientific evidence, really, that plastics have health impacts across the full life cycle. And there will be debates what the full life cycle is, so I want to be really, really clear here. And we wanted to show you a little sketch that should appear on the screen there. Hopefully, there it is. As you can see there, that plastics release all types of pollutants during feedstock extraction at the very beginning of the life cycle of plastics, during plastics production, but also importantly during use and once plastic have become waste. These releases, as you can see, can have very direct health impacts on us, for instance, through the multitude of chemicals that plastics are releasing while we're using them. However, there's also evidence that there is indirect health impacts, namely by plastic pollution affecting natural environments, and these effects will feed back on human health, of course. Let's start by looking at feedstock extraction and plastic production. It releases greenhouse gases and, importantly, air pollutants such as particulate matter, volatile organic contaminants, pollutants, and other harmful chemicals. And in the paper, we estimate that the release of particulate matter from plastic production alone is responsible for 158,000 premature deaths every year globally, and health-related economic losses of about $2 billion. So everyone is affected by pollution of plastic coming from plastic production, obviously, but I want to highlight that fence line communities and plastic workers are most affected. If we turn to the use phase, the part of the life cycle that's most relevant for probably everyone here in the room, plastic products leach chemicals and release micro and nanoplastics into the water we drink, the food we eat, and the air we breathe. National biomonitoring studies detect plastic chemicals, for instance, in nearly every pregnant woman, newborn, and adult that has been tested. And there is strong links of those exposures to lower birth weight, loss of IQ points, endocrine disorders, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, as well as certain cancers. Again, the burden of this disease is global in scale, but not distributed equally, since research shows that low-income populations, but also infants and young children, are particularly affected. if we turn to the end of life, we know that we're doing not very good when it comes to recycling, right? Still, less than 10% of plastics are being recycled on a global scale. Most plastics are landfilled, openly burned, or leak into the environment. Open burning causes air pollution, for instance, dioxins and furans. Plastic waste releases harmful chemicals and micro nanoplastics that affect the health of waste pickers in particular, but also end up in nature and then cause indirect effects. But plastic waste can also have very unexpected indirect consequences for human health. For instance, it serves as breeding ground for mosquitoes that then transmit infectious diseases. So across all stages of the life cycle, scientific estimates project that plastics cause health-related economic losses of more than $1.5 trillion every year. And these impacts fall disproportionately upon poor and vulnerable populations, in particular children. What is also abundantly clear, and that's coming from the science as well, is that without intervention, the problem will not go away. It will escalate. Global plastic production is bound to triple by 2060, escalating not only the environmental pollution aspect, but also the associated health consequences. So, given the scale of the challenge ahead of us, how can science help to succeed in the treaty? I think the Lancet Countdown really compiles all these indicators that Tisa talked about, will present regular data and updates using robust and harmonized scientific methods. So for instance, at the production side, we will look at the evidence on how much plastic is being produced, how many plastic chemicals are being produced, how many greenhouse gases are emitted and air pollutants, but we also look at occupational hazards, for instance, for waste pickers and other plastic workers. And we hope that this evidence can really support policymakers in understanding the full scale of health impacts associated with the upstream part of plastic plastic pollution. So handing it over back to you, Tisa. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Martin, for setting the context on what the plastic life cycle covers. Jane, let's come to you, because the Lancet Countdown, one of the aspects of the Lancet Countdown is that it will focus on exposures. Why is it important to talk about exposures and to talk about these exposures over the full life cycle, as Martin was explaining?
Thanks, Tisa, and good morning, everyone. Great to see you. So the Plastics Treaty's ambition is to end plastic pollution, and this obviously includes plastic pollution in the oceans, but plastic pollution comes in many shapes and forms, from macroplastic to micro and nanoplastic, and also, of course, the over 16,000 known plastic chemicals. We've laid out the scope of this issue in the new Lancet report that came out today. So we will look at all exposures, both to the environment and directly or indirectly to humans. And we will do this for all life stages of plastics, from extraction of fossil carbon that's used as feedstock to the end of life and waste management and waste mismanagement, which includes the widely prevalent open burning of plastic waste. Indeed, the latter leads to emissions and exposures, including to highly hazardous chemicals like dioxins. In addition, there are also greenhouse gas emissions, as Martin mentioned, from the production and from waste management. And there's air pollution, for example, from the abrasion of car tires, leading to micro and nanoplastics that are inhaled and end up in the lungs. So I would like to briefly zoom in on the impacts of plastic pollution during its use, and specifically focus on food contact materials. Plastics are very widely used in today's globalized food system and for packaging food. This enables long shelf life, lightweight transportation, and convenient retail selling. And this is perceived as a very useful function of plastics because it enables high profitability. But this plastics use comes with a high cost that currently is not internalized, as Martin mentioned. It's the cost of adverse health impacts from plastic chemicals and also potentially from micro and nanoplastics that leach into food and beverages during normal use and are ingested by humans every day worldwide. This is because plastics are not inert. Indeed, we know that at least 1,481 plastic chemicals have been scientifically proven to transfer from plastic food contact materials into foodstuff, and at least 1,396 plastic chemicals have been measured in humans. there's no doubt that people are exposed to hazardous plastic chemicals during all stages of plastic's life, including from the normal and intended use of plastic food packaging. And for 804 of these plastic food contact chemicals, we know their hazard properties are of concern to human health, based on hazard criteria developed under the UN's globally harmonized system. In fact, there are at least 88 plastic chemicals that are known to be highly hazardous for human health, and these chemicals are also known to migrate from plastic food contact materials, and they've been detected in national and international biomonitoring programs such as the United States and Haines, or in the Korean National Biomonitoring Program. What is more, for several of these plastic food contact chemicals, the science is reliable and plausibly links exposure to adverse health outcomes, such as for bisphenol A, BPA, or for diethylhexyl phthalate, also known as DHP. And indeed, the presence of BPA and DHP in recycled plastic food packaging, notably polyethylene terephthalate beverage bottles, has led some countries to not allow them on their markets.
Yeah.
Specifically, China has not authorized the use of post-consumer recycled PET plastic for food contact. So I think it's really important to stress that making available these data on plastic chemicals, their transfer from food packaging into food, and their presence in humans for better protecting human health. The Lancet Countdown on Health and Plastic, there we will compile indicators showing how the migration of chemicals of concern changes over time, and also track the improvements in terms of human exposure to hazardous plastic chemicals, and will address environmental exposures such as from open burning and microplastics. We'll do this by harnessing independent peer-reviewed science, which will provide both data and highlight key data gaps. This is very relevant work also for the implementation of an effective global plastics treaty, because what is measured can be managed. And I think you'll agree with me that reducing exposures to hazardous plastic chemicals and to micro nanoplastics is an important goal for the treaty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was very comprehensive. Christos, I'll go to you now. You are a medical doctor, you're a pediatrician. So when we are speaking of health impacts, how does the countdown approach this? How do you measure health impacts, and what can you track?
Thanks very much, Tisa. The health impacts of plastics identified in Lancet paper are as diverse as they are grave. You've heard a few of them just now. And it is critical to take a comprehensive approach to be able to understand, identify, and ultimately to address these public health risks and harms. We've heard from our colleagues a little bit about how this is structured. Conceptually, the impacts are identified and framed in terms of their source in the plastic life cycle, the emission, release, or hazard that mediates the harm, and the pathway through exposure and onto human health impact. Now, those pathways could, of course, include direct human exposure and direct human health impact, such as with exposure to hazardous chemicals released from food contact plastics, as we've just heard. Or they could, for example, exposure to industrial or occupational hazard during extraction, production, and waste management, including waste workers in the informal sector. A second pathway are those human exposures that occur through environmental contamination at a local, regional, or global scale by releases and emissions of pollutants across the plastic life cycle, and including, for example, the air, water, and soil pollution during plastic production that is found to be associated with elevated risks of disease, disability, and premature death in adjacent fence-line communities. Thirdly, there are a set of pathways where human health impacts flow on from impacts on our environment and the ecologies that we depend on. Examples of this third category from the report include contribution to climate change, contribution to the global proliferation of mosquito-borne infectious disease, and potential impacts on food security from ecosystem degradation. Now, when it comes to tracking these diverse health impacts, some of the pathways in human health impacts that we do have data on, we can attribute and quantify health impact and track this over time. There is, as you've heard today, consistent evidence for multiple health effects at all stages in human life for a subset of plastic chemicals that have been extensively studied. For some of the best studied chemicals, Human biomonitoring data gives sufficient data of exposure at national, regional, and/or global levels to attribute, quantify, and track those health impacts. For example, literature reviewed in the report finds that in 2015, adult exposure to the plastic monomer bisphenol A was associated globally with 5.4 million cases of ischemic heart disease and 346,000 cases of stroke. Similarly, adult exposure to the phthalic plasticizer DHP was associated with 164,000 early deaths amongst those aged 55 to 64. An exposure in the womb to PBDE brominated flame retardants resulted in the loss of 11.7 million IQ points. Other quantified and trackable health impacts include those attributed to particulate air pollution from plastic production, as Professor Wagner has already presented to us, or downstream health impacts of climate change attributable to greenhouse gas emissions across the plastic life cycle. But these aren't and shouldn't be the only indicators that can inform public health response to plastic and human health. For other important pathways of harm or potential harm, there may be insufficient data to quantify health impacts, but these remain just as important to evaluate and track if we are to address the human health impacts of plastics, and just as important to us in framing this countdown. Here, the gap in data as the measure of the unmanaged risk can itself be the indicator that is quantified and tracked in order to support effective action. For example, we find that lack of transparency on which chemicals are present in plastics, on plastics' use and applications, on their production volumes, and on their hazard and toxicity limits our understanding of the full range of plastic chemicals' potential harm to human health. For the majority of chemicals, where human hazard and exposure is unknown or unavailable, those gaps in transparency essential to manage the risk can themselves be the indicators that could be quantified and tracked, such as the extent of available data on hazard and use of plastic chemicals, the degree of chemical complexity of plastics, the extent of material transparency and traceability in plastic material, and the extent of coverage of plastic chemical environmental monitoring and biomonitoring. Each of these offer a trackable measure of the unmanaged human health risk. So, in summary, this report and the countdown to follow a comprehensive approach to human health impacts of plastic and offer a framework to track both the quantifiable harms of plastics and the unmanaged risk of harms within current data and regulatory gaps. It also provides a mechanism to track progress towards health protection, both in response to the known quantifiable harms and in action on data and regulatory gaps.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christos. It's encouraging to know that we can trace and track both progress and lack thereof in the gaps that we measure. I'd like to go to Joe now. Joe, hi. You're way over there. Joe, you've worked with communities living right next to petrochemical plants. Can you tell us what you've seen and experienced when it comes to what communities are exposed to and the impacts on their health?
Yes, thank you for this opportunity to be before you and discuss the important science that's come from the research you all have done. I thank you for the time and energy you've put into this. I want to just state that as we're here in negotiations, that my community at home in Louisiana, St. John the Baptist Parish, which is about an hour away from New Orleans, are also facing their own type of negotiations. They're negotiating their health, they're negotiating their medicine, they're negotiating their time, because we are suffering immensely from the pollution that is caused by industries such as petrochemicals. My community is known, unfortunately, as Cancer Alley. St. John the Baptist Parish, we have one of the highest risk of cancer in the country and probably the world. So it's really detrimental what has happened to us through the sacrifice of our people. Science is one thing, but science doesn't work when we have a population that is sacrificed for our economy, which is what we are facing. So my ancestors who were brought to the United States, to North America to work the plantations were sacrificed. That system only worked if you disregarded their human rights, if you disregarded their health, and their happiness. And we, as the descendants of those enslaved Africans, are also facing that same type of sacrifice. The petrochemical companies and the plastic makers, it only works when our communities are sacrificed. We are a sacrifice zone. So I have many of our members who not only face cancer once, but twice, sometimes 3 times in their lives. Our area is described as Cancer Alley, but it could also be called Asthma Alley, Anxiety Alley, Heart Attack Alley. There's all types of health impacts that we witness in our community. So science sometimes can be frustrating, and math can be frustrating, because the petrochemical companies, the math and science, always works in their favor, despite the fact that we come with real-life examples and real-life situations that show all too bluntly of what we are experiencing. The math and science, as I mentioned, is always in their favor. But that being said, it's important that we have the research and the scientists here who are bravely conducting the research that we have right now. And I will say bravely, our scientists are under attack. Our researchers that work with us, that are exposing what's happening in our community, are facing the loss of their jobs and their reputation, because they can't speak out against this without some type of reprisal. But it's still important that we have the people who are here who continue to share that information. And we will fight on the fence line, and we show that how these formulas and these equations, what they look like on the ground, and how the loopholes that are in the system, and how the ways that the science actually can go against us because of certain regulations that make it profitable to some. We have subsidies too within the petrochemical industry, and these subsidies allow for the economy without really accounting for the true cost of the petrochemical companies and the plastic makers, without considering the fact that it costs money. Every job may cost us hundreds of thousands, not millions of dollars per job. And this is what our communities are paying for the so-called perceived economy. It's just really important that we continue to be in these spaces. This is why I'm in Switzerland for the 4th time in my life, and I've never been on vacation. It's really sad when I look at these beautiful snow-capped mountains and walk around this lake, and my head is at home with my community, because I know that they are suffering and that my work is too important to even take a break, even in a beautiful setting like this. But that being said, I'm glad, I'm happy, I am blessed to be in this room with all of you. And I just want you to remember the experience, and that our communities at home, we need this ambition. We need all of you to work as hard as you can to help us with a solution that will finally take the sacrifice zone title away from our communities. Thank you.
Joe, thank you so much for reminding us that independent science, truthful science, is something we need to defend and fight for. John, let's move downstream and talk about the waste. What is it like for waste pickers, exposed as they are to waste on a daily basis, often without protective gear? Can you tell us, based on your experience working with them, what do such exposures mean for their health?
Thank you very much. I'll just start by 22 years ago, about 22 years ago, I was compelled to live in a landfill in my town back in Kenya called Kisumu, a very small city. And during that time, I encountered people that I would call family, like more than 100 waste pickers working in the landfill. And throughout the years, I've seen a lot of health symptoms, more of which Joe has already mentioned here. And today, as I sit here, most of these people I call family are no longer alive. And I would say that to us, it's a matter of life and death. When I talk about plastic, most of the time, because I've also been exposed to the scientific research and the publications that have been made, I've read a lot. And whenever I come across these symptoms, whenever I come across these publications, especially the symptoms in the publications, I attach them to names of people who live this way. And that is normally a very different feeling for me. For waste pickers, especially those living in the landfill, I represent three categories. The ones collecting from the streets, the ones collecting from households, and those living and working at the landfills. Especially the ones living and working at the landfills. It's always like 24/7 breathing in plastic. I've learned that plastic in itself is made of more than 10,000 different polymers. And when it burns, it goes back to its original state. These polymers have no clear clarity of their impacts on human health. And I know for sure that what I've seen is that the impact is very devastating. It's painful. It's like when I read and know about the cancer symptoms, the things that I started seeing as a child. I started seeing on my friends, my colleagues, the people I called family. And these are some of the things that are happening at the very place where we still work. And these are some of the things that I think are not very much being addressed. So I've also read, like, the reason why I attach it more to plastic is that I've also read that these particular impacts on plastic are like coming from communities that have lived near in places like incinerators. I've experienced the same symptoms, and this is why I also relate it to where we were. Because if you walk into any landfill in Kenya or a better part of the global south, because I've also worked in most of the landfills in Africa, I've seen that it's always burning, and whatever is always burning there is normally plastic, mostly single use, because it has no value. Waste pickers that work in the landfill are normally trying to reclaim the valuable recyclable materials that is there. The one that is left there is normally always burning. If you walk into any landfill, especially in Kenya, you'll never find a day, even when it rains, at some point you'll see smoke. So waste pickers are always breathing this smoke. And whatever is being inhaled is normally plastic that has been reduced to its original state. And the impacts there are normally like very diverse. And because we are also not in a position or a situation where we can afford to do a medical checkup or to know exactly what is impacting us. And because of the knowledge that I've also been exposed to, I very much directly link it to plastic pollution. I very much know that when we talk about the impacts of plastic pollution on human health, for me, and I would say for very many waste pickers that still live and work in the landfill, they relate it to people that they've interacted with and people that have lived beside them. So for us, it's a different way of looking into it. As we come across these publications, as we talk about these impacts, we attach them to names of people that we've interacted with, people that we've lived with, people that have in a way impacted our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, John. As John was saying, when it comes to health, it is a matter of life and death. I would like to thank my amazing and insightful panelists. Thank you very much for your insight. We will now clear the stage because we have the second panel, and we'll transition into the second panel, which is the panel of government representatives. We'll be able to talk to the panelists in person after this event. Thank you.
So we're now going to resume for the next part of this session. Thank you, Tisa, and to all of the experts who reviewed for us the health impacts of plastics across the full life cycle of plastics, and also to those who shared their lived experience of some of the impacts that are felt in communities. For those who don't know me, my name is Carolyn Deer-Burback. I'm the Executive Director of the Forum on Trade, Environment and the SDGs, TESS, based here in Geneva. And thank you for the privilege of moderating this segment of today's launch of the new Lancet Countdown on Health and Plastics. Now, as the INC negotiations have advanced, a broad diversity of governments have called for the objective of the treaty to include the protection of human health and the environment from plastic pollution. That objective is reflected in the Chair's text that will be the basis for negotiations that will resume tomorrow. Now, we've just heard adverse impacts and risks to human health and the environment associated with plastic pollution across the full life cycle of plastic. And we know that there are actions we can take to improve the protection of human health through the treaty. In this segment of today's event, we'll have the opportunity to hear from government representatives of a range of different INC members on how elements necessary for achieving the protection of human health from plastic pollution can be reflected in the future treaties. So we're going to try and move from evidence to policy action and where international cooperation can make a difference. We'll also hear from them about how important independent data sources and monitoring can be in strengthening policy responses for the benefit of public health. On our panel today, we're joined by a great set of speakers, Jorge Manuel, who's science expert in the Philippines delegation to the INC. We have Sam Adukumi, who is an expert on chemicals and waste in the government of Ghana. Wilfred Derry from the Ministry of the Department of External Relations and Cooperation in Monaco. Sivendra Michael, who is Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change of Fiji. And then we have Andreas Binden, who is Senior Policy Advisor and the National Focal Point for UNEP and the INC at the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment. So we have a great range of speakers today. I'm going to switch straight to them to share their perspectives on what can be done in the context of the treaty itself to secure the protection of human health for decades to come. So I'll turn first to Jorge, please.
Thank you, Carolyn. I would like to, first of all, commend the Lancet and the team of researchers for initiating this work of developing an independent global monitoring system that will track and regularly report on quantifying plastic-associated harm to human and planetary health, as well as progress on mitigating those harms. The Lancet Countdown is yet another urgent and a powerful wake-up call about the growing dangers of plastic pollution to health and the environment. One cannot overemphasize the value of credible, evidence-based information in developing effective interventions to protect health and the environment. At a recent national consultation in the Philippines, the participants affirmed the Philippine position that the protection of health and the environment from plastic pollution across the full life cycle of plastics should be in the objectives of the treaty. The Philippines also supports the integration of health in all relevant provisions of the treaty, and we further support a standalone provision on health. As the body of evidence grows, we in the public health community have every reason to be concerned. Allow me to share some personal thoughts. During the 2 decades that I worked in the plastics industry, we employed a myriad of chemical additives, in some cases as much as 70% of the weight of plastics, to achieve properties we desired in the plastic products. We knew then that the chemicals were not covalently bound to the polymer, so we knew that many of those chemicals would leach in time. Unfortunately, in the 1970s and 80s, none of us thought of what the health and environmental consequences could be. Now we know better. We know more than 4,000 plastic chemicals have known hazard properties, but just as disconcerting, we have little or no hazard information on another 10,000 plus chemicals the vast majority of which are not covered by any existing multilateral environmental agreements. This is a problem that must be urgently addressed. The Philippines supports measures that mitigate health impacts by eliminating chemicals of concern through the establishment of evidence-based criteria with a mechanism to add more chemicals and groups of chemicals as the science advances. We need a subsidiary body inclusive of multiple disciplines, including the health field, indigenous knowledge holders, and input from the lived experience of waste workers and frontline communities who carry a disproportionate burden of harm. We need independent experts free of conflicts of interest that can objectively review and evaluate scientific information as part of a mechanism to strengthen the treaty as scientific knowledge progresses. We need standardized and harmonized systems for monitoring, analysis, evaluation, and reporting. We in developing countries need to step up our research to contribute to these efforts. But we face many technical and resource limitations. Thus, we welcome collaborations with researchers in developed countries. My own work of quantifying microplastics in staple Filipino foods, or on persistent organic pollutants in environmentally sensitive areas, or models we're working on to predict hotspots of plastic debris in our rivers, estuaries, and coastal areas, or our recent work on health impacts on waste workers and fence-line communities around plants burning plastic waste, benefited greatly from collaborations with my colleagues in the US, the UK, Netherlands, as well as Indonesia and Nigeria. There is a need in all countries for scientists and researchers to be able to communicate our work to the general public. Working with the health sector is paramount in translating the information from a health-focused global monitoring system in a manner that the public would understand in order to enable change. As we face the challenges of monitoring production and emissions, monitoring exposures to plastic chemicals, micro and nanoplastics, and other pollutants, deepening our understanding of their impacts on human health, as well as evaluating the effectiveness of interventions, it becomes all the more important that international cooperation, sharing of information, resources, transparency, and collaborations become vital. This is where I believe a standalone article on health would be important. There is much work to be done in the coming days. Let us work towards a strong and effective treaty that will stand the test of time and benefit the health of generations to come. We should not do any less.
Thank you so much, Jorge, for those remarks and also for sharing your expertise and the specific recommendations that you made for a strong and effective treaty. I thought it was also really important that you highlighted the work that needs to be done to support research and data gathering in developing countries and the importance of investing in research partnerships with scientists around the world. So I'm now going to turn to Sam Adukumi, to share some remarks on behalf of Ghana.
Thank you so much, and good morning, friends and colleagues. Well, I'm speaking in my capacity as a national, I've not been sent anyway, so what I would say here is my capacity as a national expert and as a regional expert as well. But of course, what I would say affects developing countries such as my country, Ghana, and the African region and elsewhere. I think I've been enthralled by the first aspect of this discussion, where the science have been brought to bear about issues regarding plastic and plastic pollution. Yes, so it's not only about the pollution, because something leads to the pollution, which is the plastics. All right, so the emissions, the releases from the use, production, as we've been told, but for the full life cycle, from production, the use phase, and even the end of it, everywhere we see exposure of populations of people working. And I think the popular risk assessment equation is always risk is a function of exposure and hazard. So if you want to really eliminate the pollution, it means that you must deal with the source. You must always eliminate, perhaps ensure that people do not come to the contact or have contact with the hazard. And the hazard must also not be there. And here the hazard is about the contaminants, the pollutants that we find from plastics. That's why it's important that we deal with the full life cycle as mandated by the UNEA Resolution 5/14. So we are calling for pragmatic core obligations and control measures that will actually address the plastic menace, the pollution, and a calls for globally and nationally legally binding obligations and measures that will help us to prevent, reduce, and control the pollution from the plastic products and the processes which actually are leading to the high pollution risk. So for me and for my country and for my region and for all developing countries, we are actually talking about the scope where you deal with the upstream measures, the midstream, and also the downstream, because as we've been told a short while ago, all exposures are involved along the value chain of plastics. So in essence, the Plastic Future Treaty must actually cover all types of plastics, materials, including a mechanism for regulating or restricting the chemicals throughout the life cycle of plastics. And it should lead to sustainable consumption and production of plastics with a focus on reduction and minimization. Global production and reduction targets are needed, taking into account considering national circumstances as well. So here we're talking about human health and environmental protection from these hazardous chemicals and in plastics. And therefore, we see that from the chair's text, there are strong linkages among the plastic products, the chemicals of concern, and plastic products, their releases, waste, and product design, as in the text, Articles 3, 5, 7, and 8. And we believe that the Plastic Treaty should actually identify and be able to eliminate the hazardous chemicals groups which have the potential to harm our health and environment and can be released throughout the life cycle. We should be able to apply both global and mandatory approaches for listing of chemical concern in plastics. Initial list of chemicals and groups which are used to manufacture plastic products should actually be identified, and such substances perhaps banned from all plastic materials, not only products. The treaty should focus on substances such as phthalates, bisphenols, pH, and toxic metals, which are not addressed under other conventions like the Stockholm Convention. And if you want me to talk about a little bit about some specifics, I will talk about perhaps for us, we really need a mechanism, financial mechanism, because if you have all these nice words or measures and really you don't have you don't apply a sustainable and predictable financial support, applying the political pays principle, it means that we will not have an effective treaty, because we can have all the things in place, but for us in developed countries, we believe that we should be able to apply the political pays principle, where we should be able to ask those who are actually, producing the plastics, those who are exporting, those who are ensured, that once you pollute, you must pay, and therefore we need to avoid these harmful effects of chemicals or plastics on our health environment by taxing them to really look at the cost and then try to also provide means of implementation. So I want to end at the means of implementation where we believe that it's very key to protecting our health environment from plastic pollution. So thank you so much. I'm ready for other engagement as well.
Thank you very much, Sam, for those perspectives and also for very concrete recommendations of what needs to be in the treaty as well. I'm going to turn next to Wilfred Derry, who's representing Monaco. And may I just ask, Andrea, if you could turn the microphone off? Your microphone off
Andrea.
at the end. Super. Okay, I'll turn over to you, Wilfred. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on an issue that calls upon our collective responsibility and directly shapes our shared future. The urgent need to place the protection of human health at the core of the forthcoming legally binding international instrument on plastic pollution. We are confronting a global crisis, one of the most pressing of our time. Plastic pollution in the millions of tons each year contributes to climate change. Its waste, when released into the environment, disrupt ecosystems and put biodiversity at serious risk. Across its entire life cycle, plastics exposes human populations to growing risk that scientific research is helping us to better understand. This knowledge already compels us to act. One concrete step forward would be the inclusion within the text of the future instrument of an initial list that deals with substances identified as particularly harmful to human health and the environment. In this regard, initiatives such as the Lancet Countdown on health and plastics are not only commendable, they are essential. They provide evidence-based guidance to inform policy decisions and steer the measures we must take. I would like to especially acknowledge the Centre Scientifique of Monaco in France, one of the four founding institutions behind this vital project, with the Mindru Foundation, the Boston College, and the University of Heidelberg. Let's be clear, this crisis cannot be reduced to a question of waste management alone, so this aspect remains critical. We now know that plastic pollution is also a major public health issue. Microplastics have been detected in drinking water, soil, and the air we breathe, and increasingly within human organs. These particles can carry pathogens, toxic chemicals acting as endocrine disruptors. Chronic exposure to such substances is associated with neurological, metabolic, and immune disorders, especially among vulnerable populations such as pregnant women, children, those with chronic disease conditions, and fence-line communities. In the light of this, the future international instrument must be ambitious, coherent, and fully in line with our objective for safeguarding human health and the environment across the entire life of plastics. This should be reflected not only in the preamble and the general provisions, but clearly and strongly in a dedicated article. This instrument will serve as a foundation for future legal, technical, economic, and social obligations. The protection of human health must serve as its guiding principle, its compass, as we continue to build and adapt this framework over time. It must be forward-looking and flexible, capable of integrating new scientific knowledge on the health effects of plastics and chemical additives, as well as evolving technologies for recycling, substitution, and reduction at the source. To ensure meaningful global participation, the instrument must take into account the specific circumstances and needs of all countries, particularly developing nations and small island states. For instance, waste collection and management systems must be designed to protect workers' health, in particular those in the informal sectors. Encouraging human health and environmental protection in the overall objective of the instrument will also help to address existing inequalities. Indeed, those most exposed to the impact of plastic pollution are often the most vulnerable. Ladies and gentlemen, I am confident that we can reach an agreement that sets a bold and lasting foundation for tackling this crisis. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Wilfred, for those remarks and also for the leadership of Monaco for several years in bringing together scientific evidence around human health. It's really been an extraordinary commitment on Monaco's behalf. Next, I'm going to turn to Sivendra Michael to share Fiji's perspective and perspectives also of small island states. Over to you.
Thank you, moderator. To our traditional leaders in the room, to our scientists, our scientific coalition, I see many members in the room, to our colleagues, friends, and our fellow negotiators. Today, I'm here to speak in the capacity as Fiji's lead negotiator and the head of delegation, and also extend my thanks to the organizers of this event and offer warm Pacific greetings to you all. We start by welcoming the launch of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Plastics report, one that is sobering but is necessary account of a crisis that no longer is creeping. It is here, it is urgent, and it is growing by day. Let me be absolutely clear from the outset. Plastic pollution is not just an environmental problem. It is a full-blown life cycle public health crisis. And for the Pacific, it is a crisis that we did not create, but we are forced to live with. The Pacific region contributes less than 1.3%. Except for PNG, none of the other Pacific Island countries produce plastic. We merely import plastic. Yet our coastlines, our food chains, and our people are inundated with plastic waste from across the globe. We are downstream recipients of transboundary plastic pollution that washes up on our shores, contaminates our reefs, and our marine food sources. We are exposed to high toxicity imports, including products banned elsewhere, but dumped on the vulnerable markets like ours. We are also forced to manage waste with inadequate infrastructure, where burning plastic remains a common method of disposal and informal settlements for our informal settlements and outer islands. Let me put this into context. Fiji is made up of 332 islands that make up Fiji. 110 of them have people and communities living in them. How many landfills do we have? One landfill in the entire country that serves only 13 municipalities and town authorities. All of this is happening in our communities already, stretched by climate change, resource constraint, and limited health services. We are being poisoned without consent, and often without warning. Let me ask this room, if this isn't a public health emergency, then what is it? We must hardwire health into the plastics treaty. The future treaty must not be a waste agreement with some health language. We will not stand for that, and we are not here to negotiate a waste management strategy or treaty. It must be a health agreement with binding controls across the plastic life cycle. Fiji and the Pacific Seeds support the growing call for one, a clear treaty objective that places human health protection and equal footing with environmental protection. A dedicated article on health that, one, recognizes the full life cycle health impacts of plastic, commits parties to phase out the most hazardous chemicals and polymers, mandates transparency on additives and product composition, requires health impact assessments for plastic-related activities, and supports international collaboration on surveillance, early warning systems, and clinical research. This cannot be optional. The health of our people must not be negotiable. Health safeguards also must be across other articles, including binding caps on virgin plastic productions, global bans on the most harmful additives, elimination of open burning and unsafe waste disposal, and an inclusive financing strategy or mechanism to support frontline communities in building monitoring systems, clean alternatives, and protective legislation. We also emphasize the critical importance of an independent science and global monitoring. Coalitions such as the Scientific Coalition must be institutionalized to provide us that level of independence. We need ongoing health surveillance linked to plastic exposure, harmonized global reporting standards, and regional research hubs, including that in the Pacific, to ensure data from vulnerable communities inform global policy. We also need transparent data sharing agreements and mechanisms so that no state is left in the dark. And as the report that was just launched shows, what we don't measure, we cannot protect against. My final words, colleagues. There is still voices questioning the health crisis of plastic. There were once voices that denied harms of tobacco, that questioned dangers of asbestos, that dismissed the risks of lead in the paint or mercury in the fish. We did not come here to debate whether plastics is a health crisis. We came here to say the crisis is already here, and it's costing lives. Let us not wait until the damage is irreversible and that the science is undeniable. We cannot wait for the science to be perfect. The Pacific is already living with consequences, as Joe has just mentioned, that a community has continuously echoed. We see asthma rates. The fish we cannot no longer eat, the beaches our children can no longer play for safely. We urge this community to act with the precaution that science demands and justice that our people deserve. Fiji stands ready to work with all countries to deliver a treaty that is not just ambitious, but one that is life-saving. Let this treaty mark the moment we choose health. And lastly, before I close, I also want to say that Fiji will not support the waste speaker language. Waste speakers deserve dignity. They are part of our cycle. They support government systems. We will always refer them as formal, and we are lobbying for them to be formalized into our institutions. So we must find an alternative language. Waste speakers signals a very negative connotation. They are our collection pillars of recyclers in Fiji. We refer to them as that. We do not refer to our collection pillars of recycle in any other words. So let us mark this moment. We choose people over plastic and planet over profits. Vinagavalevu, thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And just a reminder of how lucky we are in the international community to have people like you speaking so articulately and forcefully about the issues. Sorry, I was just saying thank you, Michael, and how lucky we are to have people like you with the passion and the commitment, and also can articulate so clearly the challenges that your country faces and what needs to happen in response. So finally, I'm going to turn to our host country for this round of negotiations, Switzerland, and ask Andrea to offer some closing remarks for this government segment of the event. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And as host country and on behalf of the government of Switzerland, I would like to welcome you all to Geneva, Switzerland. We have very good weather, so the stars are on our side that we will have, hopefully, fruitful negotiations. And let me begin with just thanking the scientific community for taking this initiative. I think this really amplifies the very essence of the science policy interface, where evidence-based insights guide sound decision-making at both national and global levels. Let me highlight some key points to close and emphasize some critical elements needed for a successful agreement at INC 5.2. One message has come through loud and clear. Plastic pollution is not only an environmental crisis. Plastic pollution has growing human health impacts. Plastics pose risks to human health at every stage of their life cycle, from production to disposal. There is growing evidence that some chemicals used pose serious risks to both health and ecosystems, with vulnerable groups affected the most, as we have heard. This makes it clear that protecting human health must be a core objective of the future plastics treaty. We heard compelling arguments for taking a comprehensive life cycle approach, one that embeds health considerations throughout the treaty. Several interventions emphasized that a dedicated article on health protection, complemented by strong health-relevant measures in other articles, can ensure that this treaty genuinely delivers for people and the planet. Related to that, let me highlight one core element that Switzerland believes would contribute concretely to the protection of human health: an effective article on plastic products and chemicals of concern in plastic products. Without global harmonized rules, transparency will remain limited, and governments will struggle to manage these risks effectively. To be clear, this is not about banning all plastics. It's about making the plastic products we use every day safer and more sustainable. A broad group of countries is calling for an effective Article 3, which includes a legally binding obligation to phase out the most problematic plastic products and chemicals of concern in plastic products, as well as products containing microplastics. We need not only measures at the national, but also at the global level. That's why we are here. That's why we are negotiating a plastics treaty. This includes a global list, as we have heard by many others, of plastic products, including those containing chemicals of concern to be phased out. The global list responds to the needs to address specific plastic products, including chemicals of concern therein, on a global level in a joint effort to phase them out to protect human health and the environment, and to send the signals to the private sector. We want to have a more sustainable life with sustainable plastic products. Science also evolves, and the adverse impact of plastics on human health is multifaceted. That is why the treaty must include a science-based mechanism to regularly update the global list. And that is why it's so timely to welcome the launch of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Plastics. Independent, health-focused, science-based analysis and monitoring is crucial for two reasons. One, it translates complex scientific evidence into actionable indicators. And second, it ensures that the treaty can evolve over time based on scientific evidence and data to protect human health and the environment. Independent monitoring will help ensure the treaty stays responsive and grounded in the latest science. Science-based tools like the Lancet Countdown will also help implement the treaty and will guide our efforts in the future. So let's take action. Let's agree on an effective plastics treaty here in Geneva. A treaty that is effective, science-based, and centered on protecting people and the planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for those closing remarks on this government panel, which I think has really highlighted the diversity of support from around the world and commitment to the protection of human health in the treaty. So thank you all for your leadership and for sharing your perspectives today. So we've heard from all today, scientists, medical professionals, impacted communities, and policymakers, that plastic pollution has grave impacts and poses grave risks to human health, that these occur across the full life cycle of plastic, and it's essential that the treaty includes specific measures to address what is a public health crisis as well as an environmental crisis. We can do this in integrated ways that reflect what we already know, that our health and the planet's health are inextricably connected, that international cooperation is essential to address transboundary problems that can't be solved by one nation alone, and that to respond to increasingly complex and interrelated public health and environmental challenges, robust data and sound monitoring are critical. So initiatives like the Lancet Countdown on Health and Plastics have a vital role to play, providing us with data and evidence-based insights critical for guiding sound decision-making for the benefit of public health at the global and subnational levels. And we've heard today from many speakers just how critical that data gathering is at the national and local levels within countries, and how we need to make sure that that happens everywhere in all parts of the world to gather and drive the policy change that's needed. So the treaty that INC members will be working to close here in Geneva will set a trajectory for decades. It's not a treaty for the next 2 years or the next 5 years. It's a treaty for several decades and more. And precisely because of this, we need a treaty that's dynamic and can evolve over time in response to the best available science and knowledge that can increase transparency and the availability of critical data to assess and review that progress over time. And that can evolve as we learn what has been effective and what can be strengthened. To set our collective trajectory well, we must, using the words of our colleague Michael from Fiji, hardwire health into the Plastics Treaty. So that means we have to have a clear objective of protecting human health. We've heard that clearly today, as well as the environment from plastic pollution. We need a treaty that establishes common global rules and guidance that can substantively address the impacts and risks to human health and the environment across the full life cycle. And we need to do that in a way that provides flexibility and sensitivity to national circumstances and capabilities. And in that line, we also need a treaty that provides ambitious support for implementation towards the objective. So to draw this event to a close, I encourage everyone here and listening to read the new report on human health impacts of plastics published in the Lancet today. On behalf of everyone here, I'd also really like to thank today's speakers and the experts who've devoted tremendous scientific expertise, research and time to this new Lancet publication. There are several co-authors here today, and I'd like to invite them at the end to come up in case people here would like to ask them any questions. And I'd also like to highlight that the work of these experts comes on the back and benefits from an extraordinary community of scientists and health experts around the world who've been pushing for attention to these issues over the past decade. So we're really here talking about this because of their hard work, and I think that ought to be acknowledged as well. So we're looking forward to the new Lancet Countdown on health and plastics and the input that it can provide. I express gratitude from all of us to the Lancet for taking forward that initiative. I also want to take a moment to thank Lizzie Fuller, my colleague, who's really been the driving force behind this event today. And then finally, to the negotiators and stakeholders here today, let's be bolstered and energized by the scientific evidence and the experiences that we've heard about today. Let us give us even more motivation to work together in the days ahead to conclude the ambitious, effective multilateral treaty we urgently need to protect human health and the environment from plastic pollution. Thank you all.
Recording stopped.